Well, thank you for the warm welcome. Um, I want to extend my gratitude to everybody who's made it possible for this to happen tonight, and to all of you for taking the time to be here. I'm sure there are countless other things you could be doing with your time. So, thank you for coming here to perhaps have a dialogue with both of us about the issue of children in armed conflict generally. Of course, using my personal story to put a human face to that experience. I don't want to go on too much because I think everybody has a very strong context about my background or who I am, where I'm coming from. But just very briefly, I just want to speak about why I really decided to write this book. It was a very difficult thing to do, of course, because it required reliving the experience again in order to be able to render it the way I was able to do it. When I was writing it, I wanted to write it as the child who was in the war, not as the political science student who was at Oberlin thinking about things, So, and that, of course, required me to, really go back to this landscape to smell, see, hear, feel, and relive the experience again so that I can bring people intimately to that landscape. Oftentimes I ask myself the question, why was I putting myself through that? But I think as the book came out, I realized that it was important to put a human face to this experience, because sometimes this situation seems so far-fetched, they're so removed from people's lives. And also, more importantly, I really wanted for people to understand the human context of the war that happened in Sierra Leone. Oftentimes when the media portrays things that are occurring on the African continent particularly, it's so generalized, it seems as if people just wake up one morning and they decide to fight or to have a war. There are things that lead to it. And also I wanted people to understand, particularly for those who encountered Sierra Leone through the medium of this civil war that occurred in our country, their perception of my country was Sierra Leone equals madness. But this was a place that I was born, where I grew up reading Shakespeare, being introduced to American hip-hop music, and all of these various other things that no one knew about, really. So I wanted people to hear about the human side of the story. And lastly, I wanted people to understand the strength of the human spirit to recover if given the right care and support, regardless of what it goes through. So, for example, I was in school in the United States, and most of my peers who did not know about my background, they never in their wildest imagination know that I'd been through such a thing if I don't tell them. If you see me here in the Bay Area as a young man, if you hadn't read my book, you don't know about me, you would not know. You just think I'm just some other random young kid, which probably I am as well. So I think really for me, I wanted for people to understand that beauty as well, that the human spirit can triumph regardless of what it is that it faces. These are some of the reasons why I really wanted to write this stuff. And of course, when it came out, it took on its own a life of its own. And I'm really pleased to be here to have a discussion with all of you about it, or about other things relating to how young people are sometimes left with the choice of violence, and if whoever finds themselves in such a situation would choose violence, if that's the only option you're left with. I think this applies everywhere, so, yeah.
Very good. Well, we are thrilled that you're here. And ringing in my memory is the word that you used just before you were selected to go with the United Nations soldiers into Freetown, the word fierce. And as I listened to some of the things that you and the other youngsters had done, that word is an understatement. So can you tell us a little bit about the length of the rehabilitation process for a former child combatant, and what are the mechanisms that are needed to be put in place for long-term recovery?
Well, first of all, I think each individual recovers differently, and they require a different time and a different methodology of how they recover, because I believe that all of us have different emotional strengths. and also based on where we're coming from, what our history is before we encountered any violence that comes into our lives. For some of us who, even before the war, even though it was brief, we had a sense of what a family life was, what a strong family life. So we had a foundation, like a stepping stone, somewhere to start from. Now there were other young people who did not have that, who were born during the war, or who were very young when the war started. So all their memories of whatever stability was through that conflict, So you have to create that stability for them, and then, So in my case, it took me 8 months just to start to function, to be accepted in normal society, if that is possible. But in Sierra Leone, at the time that I was removed from war, it was also a time when people did not really know how to deal with young people coming from this kind of violence. When the war took place in Sierra Leone, we had one psychologist in the entire country. So it was all right, we had to start from, But people had a commitment, whether through UNICEF and local people on the ground, they had a commitment to really help us. And so they found the solutions along the way by trying different things. So in my case, they left us to withdraw, first of all, from the drugs. And then, of course, there was psychosocial therapy. There was some medicine involved. But really, the therapy required just being with you and giving you the time to be able to talk about the experience if you wanted, but finding ways to make you talk about it so that it wasn't a very abrupt, sort of the Western way of therapy. For example, at the center, the way you lived was the therapy. So you didn't have a formalized session where you went and sat on the couch and somebody said, so, you have 1 hour, how are you doing today? Which when I came to the United States, I went through therapy like that, and I asked the guy, so I don't know you, how are you doing? Why should I talk to you? Why should I say anything to you, So it's more because I think a trust has to be built before you allow yourself to, to expose yourself to somebody in that way, So this is really some of the things that worked. And also even things like soccer game, like activities. We played what we call football or soccer. We played games in the beginning. When we played a soccer match, if we lost, we fought the team that came to play us and we hurt them. But then when we started winning games, we were happy, and we would talk about times during the war when we played football and actually talk about certain things that we would not necessarily talk about, And later on, I found out that actually they fixed the game so that we can win, for everybody's happiness, Otherwise, anyway.
Otherwise, it's painful, right?
Exactly. Yes. So there were a lot of things that happened, and what people tried to do was to find a way to merge the Western models and the local, methods together to find something that worked for the children, And of course, besides the time that you spent at the center is important, but also what happens to you after you leave the center is equally as important, because that actually is where the preventive action takes place. If you come from a war or from any kind of violence, and then you go through that process, but you have nothing to do with your life, chances are you will revert back into what you know best. Sure. So opportunities being provided for young people is absolutely important to make them have a sense of that they can use their intelligence for something other than violence, So.
What role do you think governments, NGOs, UNICEF, and individuals can play in helping to support the ongoing needs for child soldiers in supporting the process of recovery?
Well, first of all, I think there's a need for just, all of these things are not possible without financial support, because you need people to be on the ground to do the work and all of these kinds of things, to set up these centers. So there is that. But I think there's also, oftentimes money is not the only thing. There's also skill set. There's also mentorship. There are all kinds of other things that are required. But I think, but the last part of it is really, as I mentioned earlier, is creating opportunities for these young people after they come through this process. Now, if we really want to prevent the issue of children being recruited into war, that is a whole different question, because that requires actually making sure that wars do not start. Because in any place where these wars begin, they will go after children, after young people eventually. And oftentimes I think people think some of these situations are very isolated. That's something that happens whether in Colombia, in Sri Lanka, or in Sierra Leone, or Congo. It's just, that's a sovereign nation, so we should let them. But these things are inextricably linked, in the sense that, these wars are able to prosper and to continue because of not only the internal breakdown, but also the external factors that exacerbate some of these problems. For example, in Sierra Leone, we don't make weapons in Sierra Leone, but during the war, we had so many weapons that were coming from everywhere. People were very quick to blame China and Russia, but they came from everywhere. We had M16s, which are primarily U.S. assault rifles. So somebody put them on the ship and they left the United States and were sent to Sierra Leone, you know. So there are all these kinds of things that, you know, and if you even look at, just to make a recent example, you look at what happened in Libya recently, you know, after, you know, people supported the group to get rid of Gaddafi. Immediately after that war ended, you saw there were a lot of other problems that started in that area. In Mali, there was a coup and various other things came about because those weapons spread around after that happened. And these are the connections people don't make. So even when you empower people with weapons to actually stand up for themselves, you have to make sure you make sure you look at how those weapons spread, or you make sure you contain them. So whenever wars end, other things will start because those weapons are now available, and people put their hands on it, and then all kinds of other problems will cause. So.
Talk a little bit about being a UNICEF advocate for children affected by wars. How has this strengthened your voice and contributed to the work that you're doing to bring the awareness to this subject?
Well, I started speaking about this issue, particularly about my life. I've been working with UNICEF for a while now. Before my role became very official, I'd always done stuff with them. And it really came out of the fact that I wanted to continue to add a very realistic voice to the discussion about this, because oftentimes people theorize the situation so much and I try to remind them this is happening. Right. This is not about like finding some stone on Mars or something like that. You know, this is actually going on. So as much as we can sit down and discuss what we need to actually get on the ground and implement certain things. So in that sense, I've been fortunate enough because of the education I have had, and also having the opportunity to live in the United States, to be in some of these discussions, whether at the General Assembly, Security Council, or in various other countries around the world, to witness where laws, UN resolutions are put in place, like the Paris Principles, the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of a Child, and so on, about really how you find ways to actually get governments to pay attention to this and allocate resources to actually help prevent this from happening and to help those that have already been affected. So I do that, but also another part that for me is even more important than that is traveling to some of these places where young people are coming from these wars. And also traveling to places where there are not necessarily ongoing civil wars, but there's still violence being directed towards young people, and meeting these young people and talking to them and letting them know that it is possible to have a life after that, you know, seeing that come. You know, for example, I was in Congo, and I met some young people there, and they wanted to know, you know, like, is it possible really you could be able, you know, and these are some of the questions that, and I was in northern Uganda at some point, and this kid looked at me for a while and he said to me, you know, you were only in the war for, you know, close to 3 years, and you got out, you got an education, you wrote a book. He was like, I was in it longer, and when I'm done here, I'm going to write a better book than you. And I was like, and I thought to myself, and I said, well, that's what I want. I want to read what you write, you know. So, you know, so for me, these things really are quite, you know, are very meaningful, because you see that person believing that, you know what, I can do it as well, you know. Yeah.
Can you share your thoughts on the recent Charles Taylor verdict?
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, I mean, I think it's a very important thing that happened. I think it, in terms of the development of the International Criminal Court, I think having these kinds of things, they bring about a set of precedents that then maybe can empower the court to really function properly maybe later on, you know. For a lot of people, I think there was, but let me speak for that sub-region of West Africa. I think a lot of people were happy that this happened, because this is a fellow who, as a former president, who was a big man in that area, who everybody felt like could get away with anything and nobody could, you know. And so for him to be prosecuted, it was really meant, it brought a lot of closure for some people, particularly in Sierra Leone. Now in Liberia, it was a little bit of mixed emotions for some people, you know, because people still look at, and also there are some critiques about the International Criminal Court that says, now this was, actually Charles Taylor wasn't prosecuted through the International Criminal Court, it was prosecuted through the Special Court in Sierra Leone. It just happened to take place in The Hague because they had to move him for security reasons from Sierra Leone. Now, for some people, they felt that, well, the international, this body of law that's been developed is only been going after African warlords. And it seemed that that's sort of biased and things like that. But in defense of the International Criminal Court or the Special Court, I would say, when you set up bodies like this, you want to realistically go after people you know you can prosecute. You're not going to go after some people you know you're not going to get, particularly if you're in your developmental stages, where you need to set those precedents that then will allow you to maybe go after others. So this is how I look at it, So in a way, I think for us, this was a very welcoming victory. But I want to caution, though, just prosecuting somebody like Charles Taylor does not solve the problem. The problem is much bigger than that. There are structural problems that need to be looked at and addressed in this particular area, and in various countries that these things occur. So I don't want, yes, we can celebrate, but I don't want us to think, oh, justice has been served and that this is how we should do it. There are lots of other things that needs to be done to have that holistic, change that's needed,
Makes sense. So a lot of attention has been brought to bear on the conflict in northern Uganda, in particular the Invisible Children, Coney 2012 campaign. How do you feel about the conflict, how the conflict is being portrayed, and do you have any advice to our audience tonight on how they should view the future campaigns of this sort?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I think, of course, I wasn't for the thing. I was I was against the way they portrayed the situation. But I have to give to them the fact that they were able to reach a lot of people, and they did have that power. So I just wish that they would do it well and better. What did upset me about the situation was how, first of all, factually they were wrong in a lot of the things they put forth. First of all, they didn't even know where northern Uganda was, which, you can do a simple research on Google, say northern Uganda, and they will tell you where Uganda is as a country, So there's that. And secondly, it was a very simplistic presentation of the issues, black and white, the good guy, the bad guy. So we get the good guy. It's not that simple. If it were, people would have already solved this issue, And also, there are a lot of nuances that come into this kind of thing. I've been in a war before. Good people become really bad in war. Bad people show signs of goodness. It's not that simple. You're talking about a very complex situation. In Uganda, you're talking about the South, getting rid of the North for so many years. What happens in a country that gives rise to somebody like Joseph Kony? That's the question we should be asking. If you really want to change and get at the root of it, you can't change history by just, doing simple things. What I said to a lot of people is this. If you want to be a change maker in the world, you really want to make some real change in the world, you're going to have to be willing to go more than just a simplified version of what you want to make change about, And I think the audience is smarter than they thought they were, And what they didn't bank on, which is, I don't think they realize, is that this day and age, we African people who are from villages also have access to computers and Twitter and all of this stuff. So when you say anything about us, we will react as well. I don't think they realize that. They thought this would just go out there and people would do that. So these were some of the things. And also one of the points they made was that the reason why they wanted to make Joseph Kony famous was that because the United States, Washington wanted to remove the troops they'd sent so that they would stay there. Nowhere in Washington has anyone expressed such a move, So even that didn't make sense, I go to Washington all the time for this policy work. Nobody has said that. And also they made it seem like until they arrived, no one has been doing anything about this issue in northern Uganda. It is only them, So it's about this feel-good, quick feel-good sort of change that you feel you're doing this, and to rest my case, somebody showed this in northern Uganda. And you can look it up on YouTube yourself, and people rioted, and they felt this was dehumanizing the experience, So, so it's not just people like me. And also, some of these young people, they have traveled to these places, but I think they still didn't get it, in the sense that when you want to impact the lives of other people, if you look at them as your subjects, you disregard their humanity, you can't do much. And that's what they did. They were looking at people they were helping as their subjects, rather as human beings who have the same desires, wants, needs. And, can you imagine waking up as somebody who's escaped the war in northern Uganda in some North American country, in North America somewhere, city, and waking up and seeing posters of Coney and people wearing T-shirts of him, do you know what that would do to you?
Yeah.
Nobody even thought about that,
Wow.
you know. So they just thought, oh, we'll make him famous, you know. Yeah. Come on, you know. But this is the thing. When it comes, I'll be very abrupt with this. When it comes to these situations, people think, well, we should settle for it. When it comes to the African continent, people want to settle for simple explanations. Mm-hmm. And it's about we don't accept that anymore. Us coming from this continent, we can't. You want to get involved with us, you're going to be willing to learn about our history and all this stuff. If you don't, then you have no business being involved with us. It's simple as that, you know.
Amen. So, you know, I read your book, and there's one powerful story after another in it. And one of our member of the audience asked, could you speak about a particularly poignant experience during your time as a child combatant?
Poignant experience. I'm not sure of the word poignant.
Powerful, memorable, ouchy.
Well, there are a lot of difficult moments during the war. You know, war is, violence is just, it's horrible, you know, it's complete madness. And, but really, I think there are so many moments, but I would think, you know, really for me, one of the most difficult things for me, when you're dragging a war, you're running from it, and I was dragging to it as a soldier and fighting, you had to shut down all your emotions to function with the violence. And as time went on, it became easier because you knew how to survive, that's what you did. But actually learning how to live after is one of the most difficult things. Because then you're left with the memories of what you've been a part of, what you've seen. Now you don't have access to the drugs, you're not moving around constantly and fighting. So actually learning to live with the memories is the most difficult. For me, it was the most difficult thing that I had to go through. Because now I was left with my own mind. And it can torment you tremendously, you know. So that, for me, that was really the most difficult thing. Now I had to actually remember these things, you know. But during the war, I would say one of, in my culture particularly, before all of this happened, one of the things that I remember that was very abrupt when the war came to my part of the country was how the landscape itself changed. You know, this is a place where I grew up where, you know, anybody who was older than you was your parent. They took care of you, and, you know, and you were a young person. But then during the war, that changed because young people were forced to inflict violence on people who were older than them. So the adults, their perception of young people changed. You know, they no longer saw these innocent people, so they feared them deeply. And so when I was running as a kid from the war, you could feel that this landscape had changed so abruptly that, you know, even the birds did not sing the way they used to in the morning, you know. So these things like were very visual things that you felt, you know, within your bones, you know. So that was really disturbing for me, you know, as a 12-year-old kid and nobody to explain to you. Can you imagine you're 12, you come to a town and everybody just runs away from you because all they're expecting from a group of boys, particularly all young people, is violence, you know. And you're trying to tell them, look, I'm running from the war the same way you are. And they were justified to do so because they had seen instances where, you know, these young people like us later, you know, behaved in very violent ways, you know. So, you know.
So another question: how old were you when you became a child soldier, and what happened to your parents?
I was 13 when I started fighting, and prior to that, I'd been running from the war since I was 12 years old, and so between 12 and 13 is really when my immediate family was killed in the war. You know, I was just in Sierra Leone 2 weeks ago. I've gone back to Sierra Leone quite a lot since the war ended, and the war ended in 2002. It's a very safe country now. I actually feel safer in Sierra Leone than I do in New York, where I live.
Moved to the Bay Area.
Yeah. For a very simple fact, because in Sierra Leone, everybody knows what violence is, and they've suffered it, so nobody has a tolerance for it, you know, and people know what it is, you know, so they don't want anything to do with it. This is not to say that, you know, it's utopia or anything like that, but in New York, there's still a lot of people fascinated with the idea of violence, you know, because they really don't know what it is and what it can do to you. You know, so because of that, I feel safer. But, you know, I love my country very much, regardless of what happened there. You know, home is home.
Sure.
And whenever I go there, I feel at peace, you know. So.
So, and there were a couple of other questions about your parents, which you did speak to. But so, how did your friends and any remaining members of your family respond to the book? And did you expect it to do so well as it has done?
No, I actually didn't expect the book to do so. Actually, when I was in college, I was writing this book. I never really actually had any intention of publishing it. So I never was writing the book with a specific audience in mind or thinking I'll publish it and this would happen. You know, I wrote a few short stories when I was in college, you know, and submitted it, and it won some competition, and I met a wonderful professor, Dan Sean, at Oberlin, and we became friends. So I was a political science student, and I was just taking classes in the creative writing, you know. And so, but by the time I graduated, I had this manuscript, you know, and then, you know, I was thinking, you know, I want to go to law school. I was studying for the ELSA. One of my friends is actually, we are all, you know, we were all in that little thinking, yeah, we're just young guys trying to figure out what we do next with our lives, you know. So actually, you know, and, you know, I shared it with him a little bit. He read it and things like that. But it never really, you know, I never thought. And so at some point, I was asked to show it to, he showed it to some agents, literary agents. And some of them had comments I didn't really like, so I thought, you know, I joked with my mom. I said, you know, I'll keep it when I'm old enough and I have children, and they want to know about their father. I'd be like, here, knock yourself out, you know. You know? And my mom got really worried. My sense of humor was a bit dark for her. You know, but then eventually I met, you know, somebody who's here also, Franz Silverberg, who's my aunt, you know, and through that, I went to one of those Jewish holidays gatherings. You know, I'm Jewish, if you can't tell. I went to, my mom is Jewish, so that technically makes me Jewish. So I went to one of those holidays, and it turned out that Ira Silverberg, who's an agent, who was an agent at that time, said, you know, let me see some pages, and then I would see if I can recommend somebody for you. You know, he read it and said, you know, I want to take you on, and everything happened, you know. And I remember the day that I actually had a book deal, when I signed the contract. And I think it was the first time I realized that, oh man, everybody's going to read this stuff. And I wanted to go back. I literally wanted to go back and say, I want my book back, you know. I don't want this to happen, you know. But, you know, I really felt like, wow, man, you know. So I actually had to call a lot of friends, particularly from high school, to tell them, you know, when you've always suspected I was a very unusual character, something wasn't jiving so well about me, well, you know, it's going to be in this book. It's going to come out, you know. So I had to actually do some of these things, you know. But so I never really anticipated how well it would do. But in Sierra Leone, actually, I was just in Sierra Leone. I gave a lecture at the university about literature in Sierra Leone, and how my extended family there, and my grandmother in particular, who I've been able to find after the war, my grandmother react to it is that for some reason people go now to Sierra Leone and they go to some of the places that I describe in the book, particularly my grandmother's village. She still lives in the same area, you know, like you're right across the street. So one time I went back home and my grandmother tells me, oh, you know, I was just sitting here and these white people came and they had this book of yours with your picture on it, you know. And they wanted to take pictures with me, so I went and put on my nice clothes, and I took pictures with them. So she has these pictures with these people who just showed up, you know. So she was like, you must be somebody over there, because they wanted to take a picture of me. I don't know how they knew about me. It was really funny. So this is how my family learns about this stuff.
Well,
I thought it was very sweet.
But I don't blame those folks, because the way you described your grandmother, she sounds like a really beautiful woman.
She is.
So here's a nice question from Linda. She said, I could be wrong, but you seem to have a very positive outlook and spirit, which seems incredible given what you've experienced in life. To what do you attribute that? And then she puts down, as evidenced by your sense of humor, which you just, you know, displayed.
Yes, a sense of humor is absolutely necessary in everything. But at the same time, I think I wasn't always like this, you know. I think oftentimes when people meet me, I think they forget that they kind of shrink the timeline. They think I just came out of the war, arrived in the U.S., wrote a book, and then publish it and everything, you know. It didn't happen like that. It took many years for me to actually learn to even talk to anybody, to trust human beings. Like even my mom, it took 2 years before I could call her mom, you know. So there are a lot of things, it took a lot of time for me to actually get to this point. But what I realized is that I knew how to survive. I knew how to do that very well, but I didn't know. I had to learn how to actually, how to actually live. And that's something that was quite difficult. But over the years, what I realized that I had two choices. My experiences could either become a burden, or I can transcend, I can get above them and actually use them as a backdrop for me to not take certain things seriously in my life, in a way, if you understand what I mean. Because so, for example, if when I was in college, I didn't have any money, which meant I had like maybe $50 in my pocket, and that was all I had. I remember there were times when I didn't even have a wallet, it's to save money in it, So I have that kind of strengthens me. But also I think I come from a culture that actually built within me a very strong character as a kid growing up. So I mean, when I was a kid also, my father used to say something that I write about in the book. He always said something, when you're a kid, your parents say things and you think, oh, yeah, and then as you grow older, you actually begin to see what it is. Not every parent does this, actually, but my father used to say that, if you're alive, it means that there is a possibility of something good to happen in your life. So if you no longer have nothing good to come for you, you will die. So throughout the war, I really remember this, and I realized I'm surviving these experiences. So when I came out of war, I realized the things that I came out of, there's a reason why. I tried to look for a reason why I survived, because some of the stuff that I came out of, I don't even know how I survived them, like the fights that I was engaging and things like that, So I realized, what? I have to make use of this chance that I've gotten to live again very well. And this requires me taking every day very well and having a very positive outlook to a lot of things, So hence the smile about everything always, If somebody, like when I was in high school, for example, people were always pretending to be tough and they push you around. They say, oh, he's a weak African kid. I just laughed because I thought I had nothing to prove to anybody, I just want to be left alone,
And if you only knew, right?
yeah.
So can you update us on your life? You mentioned that you live in New York, and I think I read where it's Brooklyn. What kind of work are you doing, and have you been able to kind of fully recover from this experience that you had many years ago?
Well, I live in New York, of course, and I do this work with UNICEF and things like that, but also I continue to write. So I actually just completed a second book, which is fiction. I decided to take a break from the personal narrative a little bit, which is set in Sierra Leone. So I write, and I'm thinking of going back to school again to finish up for a PhD program. But in terms of how you recover from war, if I've fully recovered, I think oftentimes when people think about recovery, they think you clean yourself from the war. You forget everything. You're this new person. That would not happen. If that's, for me particularly, you can't forget what happened. What you learn to do is to live with it. Is to learn how to control your reactions. To learn how to, because the tendencies that I've developed through the war that will remain part of who I am. As much as I would never recommend my experience for anyone, because it's happened to me, it's actually shaped me in certain ways that have, the way I look at the world, what my responsibilities are, and all of these things, So how I appreciate life more than I did if I didn't have to go, if I didn't go through this, So in that sense, you cannot get rid of everything. What you do, you refocus some of the things that you've experienced and use them positively. For example, being a soldier requires being very disciplined. Even though the way I became a soldier was not through the normal way, there was still a lot of discipline. I could bring that discipline to sitting down and studying and doing my work. When I was in college, I had insomnia problems, because of the war. And I thought to myself, I'm a college student, I have insomnia. Who wouldn't want that if you're in college, You can stay up all the time, you can read your stuff, you can go and party, and then you can come back and still have time to study, So I try to look at it differently and think to myself, I can refocus some of these things, So in that sense, I've learned to control my reaction, but also the awareness. Like I'm more aware, I think, than an average person. When I'm walking down the street, I'm more aware about my surrounding because of that, and I like that, So it may seem a bit, some people may think, I'm restless, but I think it's for a good reason, So anyway, so there are certain things like that are part of me. But I don't think, if people mean you will forget, you will not forget. I think what I hope that I will be able to do is that at some point, if I do have a family that I'm not able to, that I'll be settled enough with the experiences and with the flashbacks and all of these things that I cannot pass it on to my children. That's one of the things that I worry about more than anything, So besides that, I think I'm as normal as anybody can be, in my opinion. Maybe not, no.
Hey, in the book, you talk about this lieutenant who you looked forward to because he would recite Shakespeare. Talk a little bit about that experience and ultimately what happened to him.
I actually do not know what happened to him.
Okay.
For a number of years, I flirted with the idea of looking for him, but I thought, what would I really say to him if I found this guy? I'm not sure, chances are he probably died, but he's been absorbed into the Sierra Leonean army, which now is being retrained to be the Royal Sierra Leone Forces. I don't think that is possible. But what I wanted to really get across, I think oftentimes when people speak about, warlords on the African continent or some of these commanders, everybody always think about them like these very uneducated guys. They are very, they are not smart. They're just this like evil guys.
Exactly.
But these are people who are very charismatic. They have a sense of leadership. The reason why they're able to get a lot of people to do because they do have some kind of leadership quality. Now they use it for the wrong purposes, of course, but they do have certain things. And some of them also found themselves in these experiences when they were much younger, or maybe something happened to them in their childhood. So I wanted people to understand that there is a relationship that gets formed even in the middle of this madness. And I think oftentimes people don't want to look at that because it's easy to paint the bad guy and the good guy only.
Yeah.
But there's a relationship that gets formed. Even during the war, people try to love, people try to have fun, people try to laugh. It may be short-lived, but people still try to have a sense of normalcy, even in the middle of madness. So I really wanted to express that through my relationship with my commander. He was somebody, everybody who goes to school, who attended school in Sierra Leone is a former British colony.
Right.
Hence, because of that, we have Shakespeare. So when you go to school at a very young age, everybody begins to learn Shakespeare, So a lot of people who went to school know they can read you lines from various Shakespearean plays. So, I remember knowing friends, Roman countrymen, lend me yours have come to bury Caesar, but not to pray, without even knowing what it meant. I knew what it sounded like, and I could recite it, So, and there was also a love when you were growing up to recite these things because if you're in school as a young boy and your parents would say to you, oh, stand here and recite Shakespeare, and then, your parents' friends would get really proud. Oh, my son or my daughter knows English, So it was one of those things. So we did kind of. So my commander and I had that in common. He came from that kind of, so we recited Shakespeare to each other. Every now and then he would be like, gentlemen, I leave you to, the night or whatever. In this middle of this madness, it's kind of like, okay.
I was reading that in the middle of the night and I started laughing out loud. It was quite a moment. So were girls involved in the child warfare, and what were their activities, if they were?
Yes. What I tried to do when I was writing this book, one of the things that I did that was very deliberate was that I decided not to write about the issue of girls.
Okay.
Because I felt this wasn't my experience. I felt I would do a disservice if I tried to write about it because I didn't really know what it would feel like to be But there are girls. There were girls. And in other words, there are girls who fight just like we did. But in addition to that, they're sexually abused. Some of them actually have children of the commanders that they have to live with after the wars end. And so the issue of child soldier, the image that has been sort of become, fossilized in the mindset of people around the world is the boy with the AK-47, because that's what was on the media so much. So everybody thinks child soldier, the boy with the AK-47. But actually, a child soldier is not just the boy with the AK-47, it's girls. It's also people sometimes who don't fight, who are sent ahead of time to explode mines, and some of them end up being amputated. There are people who carry arms and ammunition, and that's all they do, so that has an impact on them. There are people who are orphaned because of that. There are people who are just potters and cooks. So there are different roles that people get affected that you become a child soldier. It's not just because you carried a weapon and fought directly in a war. So over the years, we've tried to, through the United Nations, UNICEF, tried to expand to have people understand all of these areas. It's not just, people like me who fought.
Talk a little bit about the United Nations and its how it was able to rescue child soldiers from the army, and it seems like it'd be a really complex process.
It is, and it's still going on. I mean, the issue, the recruitment of children is not an African issue. It's a global problem.
Yep.
It's still going on. It's taking on different forms. The number of conflicts, of course, have reduced, but still, the children are being dragged into conflicts around the world. So, and what UNICEF does and other UN organizations do is that, particularly UNICEF does this work, I think, more than other people, is that they go into these bushes and try to start a dialogue with the commanders. First, by creating a point of contact. So you go, you talk to the commander and say to them, you know, there are certain UN resolutions and certain laws that says you can't use children in war this, and then and then they say, well, we don't have kids. And you'd be like, okay, and then they create a relation, then they keep coming back, and eventually they verify the case and they create a relationship with the commanders, and then they begin to release the kids. They will never give everybody up at the same time. They give them slowly. Now, so oftentimes some of these guys would want to work towards a peace process, so they will begin to work with organizations for this. And sometimes some of these guys do it because they're very smart, as I mentioned earlier. They know if they cooperate with certain United Nations organizations at the end of the war, they will receive pardon, they will receive reduced sentences, they will receive amnesty for certain things. So they are not just doing it because they love children or whatever it is that, you know. they're very strategic, you know, they're doing it. But what happens is that, you know, in the work of UNICEF, it has to be something that's not politicized, that has no religious base. Because when you go to meet a commander, you have to put away your dislike for this guy. Whatever it is you have with them, you have to put it aside. Because it's about the children. If you went and met a commander and you chastise them, they probably will shoot you. Because when you come, you don't have your own army, and they will not give you any child. So you lose on all fronts. So you have to put everything aside and just create this relationship with this person so that you can. So this is the work that is done. There's no money involved. It's purely just trying to actually get to have an interaction with these people. One time I was at the UN in a meeting, and there was a journalist who was pestering this UNICEF worker about, you know, well, how can you talk to these guys? They're horrible. They're abusing people's human rights. They're this and that. This is bad. You encourage these guys. And of course, you know, people in the UN being so diplomatic, and sometimes I am not. Most of the time, actually, I'm not. I said, you know, when you're in New York, in your nice, you know, comfortable apartment with your mic and your journalism and your tape and your camera, you can stand on the highest moral pedestal you like, you know. But when you're in the bush, when you go to somebody's territory who's a commander, you disrespect them, you will get killed. And nothing will come of it. Chances are nothing will come of it. And then nobody will be freed. So, but I think people need to understand that this is a very difficult work that requires people to put, you know, their moral outrage, their ethical standards aside, and just go and meet. So this is the work that they do, you know. And of course, then you're removing children who don't like you either. So it's not like, you know, and then, you know, they're trying to hurt you and everything, and then you go to your house and everybody's blaming you because you're working with the children they think are killers. So it's like people are facing very difficult circumstances trying to make a change in the world, and, you know, and sometimes people think it's so simple, you know.
Yeah, no, I came away with great admiration and respect for the work that was being done by UNICEF. It's just pretty amazing, and glad you're supporting them. So what gives you hope? What are your aspirations for your own personal future and the future of Sierra Leone?
Well, you know, I will continue. I want to write some more. I'll definitely continue. I'll write a continuation of this book and where it ended, and write various other things. You know, I want to be involved in Sierra Leone to some extent because it is a place that it's my country. I love it dearly, and it's a place that I want to return and live. When I do have a family, I want to raise them in Sierra Leone because there are certain things that I gain from that culture that I don't think can be taught outside of that culture. You know, as much as I can try to transmit it, I don't think it'll be possible without the environment. So I love my home, and I want to go there. When I'm there, I feel complete. There are certain things. It's hard to explain, you know. It's like when I'm there, I feel certain things, even though it may sound strange because this is also where I fought as a soldier, where I had so many but it's home.
Yeah.
Home is home, you know. So I think I'll definitely be involved. I think I have great hopes for Sierra Leone. I think, and generally for the African continent, I think things are changing because I think you're having new generations of young Africans who want to change things in their country. So a lot of people are going back and doing things in their country as opposed to just being over here and saying that, oh, it's bad, somebody should do something about it. So, so some people are going to actually do things about it. So I'm not sure in what capacity I will do that, but I think I've been able to start doing that through writing, and I'm not sure, you know, what other areas I would engage in, but I definitely have an interest in. I'll tell you a funny story in that area. One time I was in Sierra Leone. You know, I'd arrived at the airport. You know, I'm coming from the village in Sierra Leone, so I'm not a city boy at all. You know, I don't, you know. And so I arrived, and then I was taken to the side. And I thought to myself, oh man, they've had it with me, because I'm always talking about Sierra Leone, chastising the politicians and all this stuff. So I thought maybe they've had it with me. But they actually treated me as a VIP. So they took me to the back, stamped my passports, and then they gave me this invitation that the president, current president, wanted to have a meeting with me. So I'm thinking to myself, why? You know, I have nothing, you know, I'm just this little guy, you know. But so I went to meet him, and then so he said to me, you know, I'm the president of this country, and every time I travel outside this country, I mean, everybody says, so do you know Ishmael Beah? So he said, I thought, you know, I want to meet this guy, you know, and see who this fellow is anyway, you know. So I thought it was really funny, you know, interesting. You know, we had a discussion about, you know, Sierra Leone and all of these things. But, you know, so in a way, I think what I'm doing through literature is enabling me to find myself in the halls and in the presence and audiences of people that I was never able to, you know. So I think that then what I do is try to make that useful, you know, try to bring young people to some of these areas so they can talk to some of these policymakers directly about what they need and all of that. So
You're a wonderful role model. So can you talk a little bit about, and this is such a gripping part of the book, talk a little bit about your initial experience at that rehabilitation center, your first few days there.
Oh, I was very upset. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, every child and in every part of the world, the contexts are different, you know. I wasn't one of those kids who was happy to be removed from the war. I was upset when I was taken, because this is what I'd known. This is what I felt, and in the kind of, at that time in Sierra Leone, when the war was still going on, I believe that this is the way to stay alive, to guarantee that you could stay alive for the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes if you had a weapon and you could fight. So that being taken from me, I felt vulnerable. And also, I developed a mindset where there was a strong distinction between combatant and civilians. So when somebody who was a civilian talked to me and gave me orders, it really I got really angry. I did not like that. So there was all of these things. So when I arrived at the center, and also in addition, we didn't like other people who weren't part of our fighting group. It was like, you weren't part of the fighting group, you're the enemy. And that was embedded in us. We were psychologically, we've been. So of course, all of these things, you know, and we knew how to settle our dispute through violence. We were so irrational. I think about it sometimes, and I realized, what were we thinking? What was the logic? So we were so restless that we would destroy our own sleeping area, we'd destroy the roof, we'd do things, and then it would rain, and then we'll blame the staff that it rained on us. You know? The logic, now it doesn't make sense, but at that time, for some strange reason, it made perfect sense that we should blame them, you know. And so, of course, we would attack them and hurt them. If somebody made tea and there wasn't enough sugar in it, instead of asking them, we'd throw the tea at them or hold them by the foot and put them in the pot or something, you know. In retrospect, it seems funny, but it wasn't at the time. But so it was all of these things. So initially, and also there was a withdrawal from the drugs, because there was no longer any access to it. So we had a little clinic at the center that we stormed. We broke the door down. We took all the medicine. We ground them together and tried to eat them. We didn't get the desired effects that we wanted, you know. Other effects came along, but they weren't the ones we wanted. So there are all these kinds of stuff. So in the initial, it was very difficult. We were very restless. You couldn't sleep. You couldn't stay in one place, you know, and all these things. But as time went on, we began to calm down a little bit, you know.
So you have any thoughts about the upcoming election in Sierra Leone?
Oh, yeah, in November. Well, all I can say is my chance. I've never voted in my life, so this could be my chance, you know, because I left Sierra Leone. I wasn't 18 when I left Sierra Leone, so I couldn't vote. And then, of course, you know, when I arrived there, I wasn't a citizen, not yet a citizen here, so I've never actually, probably this would be my chance. And that being said, the reason why I'm making that point is that I do not really know if I will vote for any of the candidates that are coming up for the, you know, it's almost, I don't know where the election will go.
Okay.
And one of the things that I don't like about the way the campaigns are run in Sierra Leone currently is that it's not based on issues of the country. It's based on, you know, there's nowhere where there's a debate where people say, okay, these are the things that I will do when I'm in power. Right. It's more like, oh, you know, I'm from the north, so I will vote APC. You know, I'm from the south, so I will vote SLPP. It doesn't matter what, you know. So that's kind of what's going on, you know. And the guys who are in power now, they've tried the best that they can, but, you know, I think if they stay in power, they will bring the country down. They will make it even poor. But the guys that are coming, one of them, the guy who is now the flag bearer for the other party, the Sierra Leone People's Party, is a former army guy. He's one of my guys, but higher. He was higher up, you know, Madabio. So he's no longer a soldier. He's a civilian. But I'm always worried about ex-military people becoming civilian leaders, you know, because when you're in the military, the mindset that you have about how you carry out things is very different from operating as a democratic president. When you're in the military, it's orders. You do it or something.
Command, control, or else.
Exactly, yeah. That doesn't work. And I'm not sure really, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
You know, if I have to, I'm not sure what I will vote for, but I think we need to find a new breed of leadership, because what happened is a recycling of the same guys. Regardless of who wins, it's the same guys who have been there since 1961. Those are still alive. It's still the same guys. So it doesn't matter who wins, you still find the same guys within the halls of power. So I think, I'm not sure, but we shall see.
How old do you have to be to run for president?
I'm not sure what the age is. There's a Sierra Leone person. I'm not sure if you know. Do you know? I think it's like about. I think it's over, like, maybe you have to be over 40 something, I think. But what is happening in Sierra Leone, I think is really funny, is that because of the war, they started moving up the age of youth, what it means to be a youth.
Okay.
Before, the age range was like from like maybe 1 to, I think, like 20 something, 21, 22. But now they move it to like 35. So I think as the guys who are in power, it gets closer to them, they keep moving it up, you know? Which means that you're still a youth, so you can't be. Which in a way is good for us. Then some of us who are getting older, we're like, yeah, I'm still a youth, you know.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm not sure, you know. But yeah.
So how did you come to America and become adopted by your mother?
The first time I came to the United States was in 1996, winter of 1996. I just come out of the war. I'd gone through rehabilitation, and I was living with my uncle in the capital city. And an opportunity came to send 2 young people to the United Nations to speak about the experiences of being in the war in Sierra Leone. Now, this was following a study that a woman called Graça Machel had done about the impact of armed conflict on children all over the world, you know. So she had done studies, and so they brought young people from all over the world to the United Nations to launch this report. So this is how I came. And it was during that time that I had my passport. You see, in Sierra Leone, a passport is a luxury item. You know, it's a right, but most people don't have it, you know. So this was the first time that I had one. This was the first time that I was on a plane. I had never been on a plane before. I was absolutely cold. Nobody told me you could turn the thing off, you know. It was the first time I was introduced to salad. My friend and I, Bah, who now lives in Canada, we got on the plane. You know, the plane took off, you know. We're already overwhelmed by everything. First of all, we're already overwhelmed because we had never seen this amount of white people in one place. Same time, we thought to ourselves, okay, you know, too many of them already. But, you know, so we're on this plane, then they served everybody salad, you know. And so we didn't know, I didn't know what that was, you know. So we're looking at it, my friend and I were discussing, wow, we had no idea people ate grass. You know? Like, this is quite amazing, you know. You know. So of course we waited, we didn't eat it, and people ate 5-7 minutes. Nobody had passed out or died yet. So we thought, okay, you know, maybe we can try it, you know. We tried it. We absolutely didn't like it, you know. You know. And so, but when I arrived in New York, you know, during the conference, I met this woman, Laura Sims, who's a professional storyteller, lives in New York, a Jewish woman who was one of the facilitators for this program, you know. And so we had no winter jackets when we came. We didn't know where we were going. We were coming from a warm climate. We didn't really know what winter meant, you know. So she gave us a jacket, and this is how the relationship started. After that, I went back to Sierra Leone after the conference. She kept in touch with me. And when the war reached the capital city, you know, if I had stayed, I would have been recruited again because some of my group was coming into the city. But because I had this passport, I could travel. So, you know, because UNICEF had got it, I could travel. So I was able to, it wasn't easy, but still I could move more than people who didn't have any documentation.
Right.
You know, so I was able to escape the country. Very difficult way, but also it took quite a while to get a visa to come to the United States. Everywhere I went to an American embassy, I couldn't get a visa. And it was in those days where when they denied you, they stamped in your passport that you were denied. So when you showed up at another place, they saw you were denied, they stamped that you were denied again. So I usually wanted to ask the person, can you ask me why I was denied? So maybe at least we can have a little conversation before you deny me again, you know. But one of the reasons they were denying me was that they said I couldn't prove that I intended to return to Sierra Leone. And how to prove that was to show documentation of having money in the bank in Sierra Leone and also having ownership of property. Now, I was coming from the remote part of the country, and I said, yeah, I have property. Everybody knows my grandfather has a land. That this is how we operate, Yeah. So the standard was not applicable to me. I didn't have any paperwork. And I thought to myself, let's assume that I actually had a bank account. When somebody's shooting at you, you're not thinking, I should print out my bank statement, so I can show some guy at the American embassy when he asked me for it, So it was somehow I began to realize people don't really know what was. So eventually, I was given a prospective student visa to come to the U.S., which meant that I would arrive, apply to schools. If I got in, then my study would change. If not, then I had 3 months, and I have to go back. I don't know where, but this was the agreement. So I arrived, and the same thing came up when my mom took me around to schools. Everybody said, "You have a report card?" I said, "No." They said, "Well, everybody has a report card." I said, "Well, no, where I'm coming from, So again, it was some of these conversations. Actually, how I got into school was I wrote an essay about why I did not have a report card. This was one of my essays. And then I got taken to the United Nations International School. So this is how I came to the U.S. And this woman, I think she had really, when she decided to take me into her life, she had not really conceptualized what this meant. She meant it, but I don't think she really understood what it really, until I was walking from JFK going towards it, and I could see her face thinking, oh man, he's real. He's like a real human being, I'm going to have to deal with and stay, So of course, I had to learn how to be a son, and she had to learn how to be a mother. And it was an interesting thing because it was also around the time when people didn't know very much about former child soldiers. So everybody feared us, that we were this time bomb waiting to explode. We could be violent any moment. So I remember when I was living with my mom, her friends would call her and they would say to her, I can hear them over the phone, they would say, oh, make sure you hide the knives in the kitchen. I'm thinking to myself, wow, But she was so, I really admired that about her. She just saw me as a boy who needed a home and who needed a mother. And that was sufficient for her. And she gave me that trust, and I sort of, and I was also a very difficult kid. I wasn't like a normal kid that you adopt, I came with my own issues as well, so anyway, but it worked out. I think it worked out. I did a pretty good job.
You're a fortunate man. So are you in touch with any of the UN or UNICEF people who helped you along the way?
I've been able to meet the local staff, particularly I've been able to find some of them after the war. For a number of years, I tried to find, particularly this nurse, Esther, who was one of the women who really I began to trust early on, the first adult that I started talking to and trust, even though I didn't allow her to know that, after the war. For a number of years, I looked for her, but I wasn't able to find her. And then when the book came out, I was in Canada giving a talk, and somebody gave me a number. So she actually lives in Canada now. So I was able to find her and thank her. I've been able to find some of the field workers, like Leslie Booker, and a guy called Mr. Kamara, Alusain Kamara, who was the head of the rehabilitation center that I was at. He lives in Boston now with his family. So one time I was in Cambridge giving a talk, and I'm seeing somebody in this audience that I knew, and I'm thinking to myself, hey, maybe I'm having one of those flashbacks again, So I had to stop the talk and be like, is that Mr. Kamara? And he said, oh yeah, it's me, and of course, it's really always good to see that because it's almost like a page in the book came alive, and this person was there, And for me also it means a lot because then I've been able to go and actually thank them. Because the time that I was there, I didn't really appreciate what they did, and I don't think
You got angry when they smiled at you.
Exactly. So I had to go. And now they invite me to their homes to have dinner with their families. Before, they would not even tell me where they live. So I joke with them about it. Well, circumstances have changed.
So here's an interesting question. I'm just going to read it. Can you please address the controversy regarding your story?
Oh, yes.
2, if you could say anything to students regarding your book, what would it be? And 3, what are your thoughts on Charles? Oh, we already talked about Charles. But the first 2.
Okay. Well, first of all, when I wrote this book, when it came out, I had a feeling that I'll have people coming out of the woodwork with all kinds of stuff. So first of all, there are a lot of things that were already, before my book came out, there already been instances where like the James Fries had been published and everything like that. So everybody was already on the edge with those kinds of things. But what nobody realizes is that when you write a book, such as mine, you take it to the publisher, they don't just go out and publish it. They fact check, they verify, they have their own independent fact check. When you publish an excerpt of your book in the New York Times, they fact check, they verify. So we've already gone through this process. But of course, when these tabloid paper in Australia started, they didn't mention any of that. I think people wanted to become famous through me. First of all, there were a lot of things right now. First of all, here's a young African kid who wrote a book. Not only that, he used to be a former child soldier. This can be possible. So there was this was really the thing that was underneath it, you know. And of course, you know, some of the stuff, it all started, they said, first of all, that somebody had said that they were my father in Sierra Leone. And of course, if you go to Sierra Leone, a post-conflict country, or anywhere, and wave a book around and say, this guy is really famous, he's made a lot of money, does anybody know them? Of course, everybody say, yeah, that's my son, that's my brother. I'm like, really, man? You know, of course, you know. I would have said, yeah, I know this guy, you know, he's my brother, or he's my, you know. I don't said anything. But also people don't realize certain things. I realize when I go back to Sierra Leone, I bring people with me who are from the United States or other places in Europe, and we go to my village, and everybody comes and they say, hey, brother, I haven't seen you. And everybody say, well, how many brothers do you have? You know, because they don't realize that if you grow up with somebody in the village, everybody's your brother and your sister. Everybody who's older than you is your aunt, is your uncle, you know, is this, is your dad. Some people even say, oh, this is my mom, and you know, but people didn't understand that context. So there was a lot of this kind of stuff. But when it started also, besides that person who said, oh, I know this person, they said, oh, the map is wrong. The timeline, the map, and all this stuff is wrong. How can I prove that I was in this plane? I said, first of all, I wasn't a journalist who inserted myself in war and said, you know, I have the pictures and the recordings and I'm taking, you know. I wasn't like, oh, we just had a war. We just fought that battle. Can you guys take a picture and sign here so that, you know, when I write this book, we can actually have proof for the New York Times or for whatever. You know, it's like, seriously? Man, you know. So it was all these kinds of stuff that came up. So they said, oh, you know, the map is wrong. The village that I said I grew up in and all these places doesn't exist on the map. Simple explanation for that. We gained independence in 1961. The map for Sierra Leone was drawn before that by the British. After that, no new map had been drawn until. So, of course, villages had come into being since then. They are not on the map. It doesn't mean they don't exist. So the journalist went there, and I was like, you've been to my village? He said, yeah. I was like, it's there. I said, yeah. Is it on the map? No. It's there, yes. You know, so it was these kinds of things. But I realized at some point, you know, the more I try to make sense, to rationalize the issue with them, the more they have something to write about. So at some point, I just said to everybody, look, read my book, read what they're writing, and you use your own intelligence to decide what you want to believe. Because it's difficult to argue with somebody who doesn't know what the reality of war is, who sits behind a desk in New York, has never been anywhere, and say, well, I don't think war is like this. Like, oh, because you watched the Hollywood film yesterday? You know, like, you know, seriously, you know? So there are all these kinds of stuff, you know, but for me, you know, it was just like, I was like, you know what, you know, forget it, you know. And the second part is that, what would I say to young people who are reading this book? Well, I really wanted young people to have a sense of what violence is, you know, because I think I was beginning to realize, living in the West, that there was a lot of fascination with it. And I wanted people to really understand what it is, that there's nothing fascinating about it. War is not cool in any way at all. It's absolutely devastating. And I think, you know, that's one of the lessons I wanted people, young people particularly in this part, to learn about that. But also for people to understand that no matter what it is that happens in your life, you can triumph it, you know. And I want to make a point in this area, because I think oftentimes when I meet people, they say, oh, you know, you came through this, your life was difficult, you know. When we go through issues, you know, the circumstances and the substance of what brings us suffering may be different. Some may be heightened than others. But I think when a human being suffers, I don't think we should compare that suffering at all. Because if somebody is very sad because their dog died, you do not know what their dog meant to them and what emotional pull that had for them. So I think nobody should belittle that, because once we begin to belittle other people's suffering, I think we're going back to the same thing that happened, you know, which means that, oh, you suffered less, you know. The circumstances are different. But I think we should, you know, take care of anybody who, whenever the human spirit hurts, it's because of something that is uncomfortable to them, you know. So I think we shouldn't just throw it out, you know. So I've always been very careful with people say, well, compared to you, Maya, I'm saying, no, there's no comparison. Right. suffering is suffering. The circumstances may be different, but when a human being suffers, it's the same thing, in my opinion, you know. It's arguable. Anybody can argue against it if you like.
Totally agree. You know, I work for Red Cross, and we respond to disasters, big and catastrophic and very small. And it doesn't matter if you are in a single-family fire and everything you had was lost. That's just as devastating as if it was Katrina and the entire population was displaced. So you're absolutely right. It's what's inside, and it's our job as humanitarians, as human beings, to see to it that people are cared for.
Yes.
What you have done, what UNICEF is doing, what the World Affairs Council puts on display on a regular basis allows us to reflect on some really important things. And Ishmael, I am honored and pleased that I've had the opportunity to have this conversation with you, and I want to make sure that everybody knows there are copies of your book back there, and hopefully you will be able to stay and sign several copies for people as they buy them. I, for one, have mine, and I'm going to look forward to your signing it. And I just want to give you an opportunity to say one very hopeful thing to the audience, and we'll end on that note. So,
one very hopeful thing. Well, you know, what I would say is this. I really believe that I think, you know, there are a lot of things going on in the world, and I think oftentimes we find ourselves discussing only the bad things and forgetting also there's also a lot of good things that are going on in the world, you know. So I just want us to actually sometimes to look at that the human beings are very good, you know. You know, I come from a situation where I've been on both sides of the aisle. So, but I believe human beings are intrinsically good. I believe we have a capacity to actually do good in the world. And there are a lot of good things constantly happening, but oftentimes it's the bad news that makes it on the media. You know, that's what people want to hear. So I want us to sometimes look beyond that, particularly when it comes to my own continent, the African continent. People always want to look at sort of the bad picture of it, not to look at, you know, the young lawyers that are there, all these things that are going on, development that's happening, people actually going back home and doing things, you know. Those things people don't think it's relevant or at least newsworthy. So I want us, whenever you feel disgruntled, you feel that there are too many bad things going on there, I also want you to actually look at some of the good things that are happening, but also look at your own capacity to change the world. And one last thing that I'll add is that my life, it is what it is. Because one of the lessons that I learned from my experience in being able to be where I am now is the fact that because several people woke up one morning and decided that they're going to use their lives for other people, not only for themselves. And that brought about a lot of change in my life and to a lot of people who decided to do something. So what I've started doing with my life is that I feel that my life is only worthy and valuable if I'm able to use it for others as well, not only for myself. So that's the lesson that I think I want to leave with everybody, you know. I hope, you know, people will try to. And oftentimes it's not just about donating money, it's about skill set. It's about acknowledging other people's humanity, regardless of who they are and where they are when you walk past them, you know. So, so I think, anyway, this is what I would.
I think that's beautiful. Please join me in saying thank you.